Welcome to Ollie Unplugged, because someone had to say it. Collecting all your data and then complaining about the cost isn't a strategy. It's a tantrum. So we've got a great guest again today to talk about OTel, and it just ain't that hard. It's Paige Cruz. Caller, are you there?
Bow, 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 bow. I'm here.
It's been a while, Paige. We are recording this right now after the long Memorial Day weekend. This is a great jump right back into our week. We have this 3-part series, OTel It Ain't That Hard. But before we get into it, let's open it up with a little observability hot take again. This time, I want to hear your hot takes on DevOps.
I'll give you mine. DevOps isn't broken because it's too slow. It's broken because we've made it fast without actually trying to figure out what we're delivering. Back to value versus intent.
We've automated and accelerated some vague intentions and directions, it sounds like.
Yeah.
You can go somewhere fast. Is it where you want to go?
Exactly. I'm doing this. Why are we doing it? I haven't thought about that. So it's really something to think about as you're going through your DevOps trek. What are you doing it for? What are you getting out of it? Paige, what about you? I bet you've got a hot take of some sort.
Oh, DevOps. For me, I believe at this point in time and space that it is a catch-all term that unfortunately we as an industry have rendered effectively meaningless. It did have a meaning. It does still have a meaning. I almost separate the real DevOps definitions from what a lot of folks in the industry say or refer to as DevOps. And I will say I have regretted every single role I've taken that was SRE/DevOps or on a DevOps team or within a DevOps department. That vagueness of the term meant blurred boundaries, unclear ownership, which is shorthand for ops does everything. I'm ready to leave that term as the industry is using it. I'm ready to leave it behind. It is not a crime to hire a release engineer, a cloud infrastructure engineer, an automation and integrations engineer. Let's just put sensible job titles back into production, please. That's
Yeah,
my hot take.
I totally agree.
I'm going to have to snowball off of that. I was recently reading a blog on the difference between DevOps and SRE. And as someone who I've been an engineer, but why are we overcomplicating it? Can we simplify a little? There's tools, there's people, there's job titles, there's processes. Like everything is so complicated in the cloud, blah, blah, blah. I could go on forever. It's hard to, as a beginner, level set and really understand the roles of each of these titles. So why, like, it's like what you said, it's like pretty interchangeable between a lot of things. So
I'll pile onto that. I honestly, to be fair to DevOps people everywhere and the people who came up with the idea of DevOps, it makes sense, right? And it was to address the calamity of waterfall, where you build something and then 6 months later you show it to somebody who says, "That ain't what I wanted." So it makes sense. And having been in organizations that moved from more waterfall to DevOps and seeing the impact it made, if you do it well, then there is a definite benefit. But I feel like a lot of people tend to think of DevOps and then don't strategize. Big surprise here. I go talking about strategy is my thing. I think it's like anything else. You've got to think about, all right, what do I want to get out of this? DevOps doesn't erase the fact that you need smart engineers and various levels of responsibility. It's just a step away from the hierarchical organization that we've all traditionally seen, with an engineering team over here and a development team over there, and everybody's got very siloed roles instead of bringing everybody together in more of a product focused team. So I think there's great opportunity if you think through it, but it's similar to that we've talked about last week with the importance of a solid observability strategy.
You can get very far by asking, what's the problem we're trying to solve here?
Today, we want to really focus on that enablement for engineering, and not just engineering, but the entire technology organization, whatever you call your organizations. And here's my thesis. And so we can debate this amongst all of us today. OTel adoption fails because it looks like this giant ivory tower initiative. Somebody decides that we're going to go down this path because it feels like a great idea for whatever reason, similar to DevOps or anything else that we've talked about. But you don't succeed if you don't empower engineers with the right tools and do things like get them set up with auto instrumentation where that's possible, or even do the basics, explain the benefits of why we're doing it, and then take the friction away from people as much as possible. Because if it becomes a burden, then they're not going to do it. As I talk to different people and we talk about, hey, have you thought about migrating to OTel? You get this like big bright-eyed, oh my gosh, that's a lot of work. It's a balance between making sure that software engineer doesn't need to know everything there is to know about OTel.
If I'm a developer, even if I'm on the ops or SRE side, I really break up observability into three kind of buckets. There's creating the data and the metadata. That's creating your metrics, your logs, your spans for distributed tracing, and all the tags that you add on to help you analyze that data. So creating the data is one big area of friction. If you read any vendor's observability survey, you know that organizations are contending between 3 to 10 observability vendors at a time. So if I'm an application developer, do I really need to know the nuanced differences between all the different SDKs for the vendors that I need to send my data to just to create the data in the format that those vendors expect? That's not the best use of my time. So there's a lot of friction with just creating the data when you're juggling different observability vendor ecosystems. That's, I'd say, probably the biggest point of friction.
That point also makes a great point of why OTel is becoming so popular. Last I looked, OTel project is the second most popular project, or at least one of the very top behind Kubernetes, right? It's getting a strong adoption across the space. And your
Oh, yeah.
point about having 3 to 10 observability platforms and a software engineer having to understand the nuances of every SDK and every agent and everything out there is actually a really great, it's a friction point, but it's also a really great consideration for why OTel might be a good answer for you.
Yeah. If I was a developer, I would love to invest my time into learning how to create data with OTel once and be able to take that knowledge from company to company as we migrate vendor to vendors. That's very appealing. That's like durable knowledge you can take with you, which
Sure.
you don't always get. Sometimes you join an org and they've got a funky stack or they got something going on. I always hated having to learn knowledge that or a particular tech stack that I thought I'd never touch again. OTel's not like that. Creating data, those are some friction points. There's then getting that data from where you're collecting it, your applications, your data stores, your servers, the clusters, and getting it to a platform. I'll leave that open ended. There's self hosting, open source stacks, that hybrid approach, or just going fully SaaS, sending it to a vendor. All valid approaches, all valid trade offs. But the point is, you've got to take that data that you've created and get it from A to B or B, C, D, E, F, however many vendors you've got. That I don't know. I think it's important for developers to know the journey their telemetry takes, the high level sketch. You should know if there are rules being applied to your logs.
Yeah.
If the logs that you see when you're running local dev are different than you even see in staging, you should know like the broad strokes of why that is. You don't need to be down like tuning and pruning the log formatting rules, but it's important to know the logs as emitted locally, there's some transformation that happens. And maybe if you wanted to go poke out where that is for an advanced user. The last area where I would say almost the bigger point of friction than just creating the data is then in analyzing it, querying it, being able to display it in a chart, being able to do ad hoc queries, and then importantly, setting up monitors. That is also where the vendor proprietary ecosystem bites you. I talk to friends and they say, I have to keep up with 3 different query languages across the 3 tools where my data is sent. And I don't have time to be an expert on all these. So I get what's good enough. I get to some passable level and then I get back to building. And so those are the areas where I see friction, those 3 phases really at the creation and then at that analysis and querying step.
I couldn't agree with you more on both of those. I think that there's another piece that
Mm.
ties very closely into what you're talking about, and that's correlation. When you've got multiple observability tools out there and you've got multiple data types coming and collected by different SDKs, different agents, then you've got this different format of data coming into whatever your platform is. And then it's up to that platform to try to make sense of it. And that's difficult, right? When trace IDs are different or they don't have trace IDs consistently, it makes it even harder. And then that human factor that we've been talking about, right? Here I a.m., it's 3 in the morning, and I've called Paige to support something that she just inherited. It's got a gazillion lines of code. She has no documentation, and here we've instrumented it. But guess what? She's got to cross 3 different observability tools to find it. And so she's swivel chairing from one
Yep.
screen to another, trying to tie timestamps and data. And is this a metric that's spiking, or is it a result of what's going on? And so it's just another point of where I think OTel really makes sense. And getting that friction out of it is where you win and get past the other friction that you probably just become numb to. On the same topic, and talk about ideas for, okay, you've made the decision to commit to OTel, and now you're worried about the lift, right? Yes, there's going to be lift, but let's talk about some things that companies can do, whether it's your platform engineering team, whether it's you have a central observability team, or maybe your SRE team takes care of this for you, whatever. But there are things that can be done
Yeah.
to insulate the developer a bit. Certainly auto instrumentation is possible, which Paige, I think you could shed some great light on there. And then about the idea of building wrappers or things like that completely isolate the developer from having to know anything more than, okay, I need to instrument, so I need to call these functions and I can get them here. And if I get them here, then I know they're kept up to date, they are supported, blah, blah, blah. All the things that you care about, but you can just take for granted because somebody's done that work for you. So
Yeah.
Paige, talk to me a little bit about those two things, auto instrumentation first and what you've seen and what's
Okay.
possible today.
There's one step that I see companies missing, and you get confronted with this when you either go to do a big reinstrumentation and when you go to migrate tools. And that is understanding the scope of your observability debt as it stands today. You are going to have to contend with the years, quarters and quarters and years of dead end dashboards of that monitor somebody spun up for a test once and then they just permanently muted it instead of deleting it, but no one wants to delete it because they didn't create it. And what if somebody needed it? I feel pretty comfortable saying you have observability debt today, and a
Yes.
good thing you can do if you're even thinking there's a migration on the horizon, if you really are keen to bring OTel to your org, the biggest blocker you're going to run into is all of this debt, and you run into it at the time that you're trying to leave. So I think the best thing you can do as a discovery, as an early phase, getting the requirements, is understanding, having teams, the application dev teams hand them a list and say, hey, these are your observability artifacts. These are all your monitors. These are all your dashboards. We've sorted them by the last updated. Here's the ones we feel confident that you could probably get rid of, but it's ultimately your decision. Getting your monitoring house in order, team by team, will really help you understand what data is being used, who's using it, and where. Getting that lay of the land really helps you.
Great tie back to episode 1, where we talked a lot about things like telemetry FOMO, collecting everything isn't a strategy, and creating the problems that you create. And now you're touching on them again. As somebody who used to lead a central observability team, dashboard sprawl is real. And I hate dashboards to an extent because I feel like they're exactly what you said. People create them because they need to want to in the moment, and it's never to be used again. And then you find yourself in a plan to rethink your observability, and you've got this sort of landfill of dashboards and too much
Yeah.
telemetry to deal with. But it's a great call out.
And that just wholesale replacing the data you have today from a proprietary SDK to OTel isn't going to help you solve some of those blockers across the board. The other two practices that I found really helpful are to, as you're doing any re-instrumentation or you're trying to change the way things work, ask folks to write a friction log. Next time you go to instrument, I want you to write down any place. It could be little, it could be a really big showstopper, it could be a tiny little annoyance. Write down the things that got in your way. Whenever I talk about side projects with my husband, I go, yeah, here's all the BS I had to do, right? There's what you want to do, the building, the cool stuff, the next new thing, the analysis. But sometimes there's a lot of little paper cuts that get in the way. Those are very important to understand because that's what you want to start abstracting and addressing. So that friction log, I've also heard it called at one company the lost productivity survey. So when you are angry, that's the most time you're likely to fill out a survey or want to have your voice heard. So spin up that like open Google form or whatever to say, hey, if you feel like you've lost too much time to a problem that should not have been on your plate, write it down and let us know. That also takes that heat off of the frustration we can feel sometimes running into silly little tech problems.
The friction log is fantastic, and that helps to promote continuous learning. We thought this was going to work, that didn't work. Let's tweak it here.
And I think it's important because these central observability teams really suffer from the like burden of expertise, the curse of knowledge, where I would not think it's a big deal. Like, okay, we're moving to OTel, go ahead and add in the OTel SDK. Like, here's the docs. The OTel docs are pretty good. I would be like, okay, I know what to do. I'm going to try this out. I'm going to, I wouldn't need much more. That's very different from a developer's experience who has been working across multiple vendors where they literally drop in a one line in a library and get everything. There's a little bit more plug and play with OTel. There's some choices you need to make, and helping developers navigate that is, I think, the function of a central observability or SRE team.
If you're struggling, listeners, to think about what should I instrument and how do I get ahead of this big mound of telemetry and what I want to instrument, we talked a lot about this in episode 1, so take a listen back. I want to move a little bit here. Paige, you touched on it just a minute ago, this idea of enablement and ownership of
Yeah.
observability. From my perspective, observability is something that the entire technology organization should own or should have a hand in some way, shape, or form. If
Yeah.
you're a guy in NetOps and thinks you don't need observability, I promise you, you're going to want it when you start getting blamed at 3 a.m. for the network being the problem. I spent last week talking to a lot of amazing people at Red Hat Summit, and a lot of them were systems engineers who were at companies just moving into cloud. And as we talk about observability, they're saying, oh, we just monitor our servers. I said, but what if it's 3 a.m. and you're on a call and you keep getting blamed? And you could not only say, it's not my server because, and here are the metrics to show that your platform is running or your cloud environment is running properly, but also here's what I see happening in your code. Observability is something that every person can benefit from, and there's a transparency that I think will rub organizations a little the wrong way at first, but at the end of the day, it gets everybody off calls faster and it benefits everybody across the org.
So I want to like plus 1 million to what you just said. Observability is for everyone. It is a problem when nobody owns it, when it's that sort of thing that everyone pitches in, but it's always one team that's cleaning up the pizza boxes at the end of the party, right? I like to say that SRE are not your monitoring butlers. That is the biggest thing that frustrates me that I see across the industry, where you have this totally undervalued, underutilized SRE team who's schlepping around writing other app teams' monitors for them. And to your point, observability is for everybody. If you're working in a cloud native system, in a hybrid environment where you've got a little on prem and you've got a little in the cloud, you've got public cloud, you've got private cloud. If you're working in a distributed system, yes, you've got a team who's providing the infrastructure for you. You have the developers writing the services on top of that layer. All those services, the many microservices you have, or macro services, or however you want to call the size of your apps, everything is interconnected. So it is no longer this 3-tier web app. We have these really strict rules, and you could get away with throwing stuff over the wall. These days, like you said, it is not enough to rule out, oh, culprit's not my app. Sorry, sucks for you guys. Like, I'm hopping off the bridge. No, the power from standardized data through OTel, for example, is your ability to not only diagnose and identify problems within your scope of responsibility, your set of services, your set of infrastructure, but to also then hop out and say, oh, here's what's going on upstream, or here's how I'm affecting downstream. It's your ability to not just take care of your yard, but also look at the whole neighborhood and help everybody. You will get so far if you can learn how to navigate and query the observability tools and the data at your disposal for other teams. That, to me, is the power of observability, really being able to go beyond your bound of scope. And like the thing that comes to mind is I worked at an org that had Prometheus metrics, and we also had proprietary observability vendors. That happens. That is more common than we think. And I went to go query and compare API latency across two different services that were showing some issues. The way that the metrics were namespaced were not what I was used to in a standardized model where I could say HTTP latency, whatever, P95 or max for this
Right.
last time range across the services. That's one query that could target both services if I included them in the filter, and I would get that data back. That was what I was used to, that ad hoc query. Did not realize it depended on a standardized telemetry layer. So this org, I went in and was like, whoa, all the metrics are scoped and prefixed with the name of the service. Fine. Okay. I knew the two names of the services. Luckily, I had enough knowledge to query for that. But then teams had decided on different terms for the metric communicating the same latency. And it was just like, why do I have to now keep this data dictionary in my head because we've given you a free text box? Dear God. It's why logs are such a challenge. Oh, it's why I
Right.
love traces.
I know.
But like that impeded my ability to quickly ask and get a question answered and just multiply that across all the different other service interactions you may be curious about. And that was just between two services. Like it's a real problem.
And it's not going to get better in this world of cloud native. That's kind of the point, right? All of this reuse of services all over your environment and being able to scale and drive the complexity to make your app that thing that makes your company better than your competition. It's real. It's not going away. We have to figure out how to navigate it. And the answer is not tribal knowledge. The answer is not all of that. And in the framing of observability for everyone and observability as a shared responsibility, I think I'd be failing if I didn't talk about what the role of the observability, the central observability team, or
Yeah.
whoever owns observability as a program
Yeah.
at your organization should be doing. And that's really governance. That sounds so bureaucratic and fill out this form and do all that. No, it's understand and enable, right? Understand what's going on in the environment. Build things like starter kits so that the developer can quickly instrument an environment. And for commonly used technologies, they don't have to build a dashboard for something like Kafka, right? It's already there, right? They don't
Yes.
have to figure out what to instrument. They start basic. They're given guidance. They're given a primer on a primer. I thought we're getting very proper here on the
Very
priming up.
British.
Yes. No, getting without giving them a primer on everything, starting though with why you're doing observability, what it can do for you, what it can do for you specifically, and just getting people excited and then giving them the tools to do it. That's really what I think the central observability team's role has shifted to from,
Yeah.
hey, my monitor didn't fire. It's just way more complex and a lot more difficult than it used to be when things were on-prem running in a few servers.
Observability is everyone's job. What does it literally mean? What does a central observability team do? Governance. Let's talk about one place that's really putting a lot of stress and pressure on these COT teams, which is the cost of observability. That is probably the place that is most unfair. When everybody's contributing to the data that gets created, the data that gets stored, the data that gets queried, it's still only the central observability team who gets effectively paged. It's not counted as a page because it doesn't come from PagerDuty. But when your CTO comes in and says, the bill spiked last month, we just found out, we're halfway into this month and we're burning money. You need to put out the fire. What are you going to say? Oh, no, I was going to go work on my cluster upgrades. No, you hop onto the burning fire. Reacting to the bill is exhausting, especially when you're like, I didn't even create the freaking log that blew the whole thing up. That wasn't, why am I accountable for something that I did not do? A lot of it comes down to the tooling not supporting effective guardrails. So, practically and tactically, that was the biggest thing I appreciated about Chronosphere when I joined is this ability to give teams or departments, whatever construct you've got in your org, quotas. You can say the business has decided to spend X on observability. We've got a little slush fund in case something exciting happens.
Right.
And here's your portion of it. And here's how much you're costing today. Here's all the historical analysis. Like, this is your budget to manage. That is so much more effective than me chasing a bunch of teams trying to figure out who twiddled the knob that made the bill go up.
I 100% agree with you. And if there's not a sense of I'm not in trouble, if our observability costs have this sudden overage, that creates a problem too. But I think it's about creating a culture that's not share the blame, but share the
Yes.
benefit. And there's a fine line there. But I think that comes from everybody working together to help define that governance. The central observability team owns the governance, but they're working with all of their stakeholders to get an agreement on this is what our governance is. These are our tags.
Yeah.
These are whatever.
You guys are on a roll. You're nerding out, and I'm all for it. You're saying that you can't put all of it on the central observability teams, but how do you continue to enable developers? I know you said starter kits, but it sounds like there's more of like a cultural shift too.
There is. I think having been in this spot, and Paige, certainly you have too, observability doesn't ever end. It's never done. Code changes. It would be done if you stopped developing and stopped innovating. There's all these touch points. Like I love the friction log that Paige mentioned earlier in the episode. And I think that's a great way to circle back on what's working and what's not, and where maybe there needs to be more enablement. And I think it's things like that, along with keeping up with technology. How can I, as a central observability team, make sure that I've got a group out there that doesn't feel like they have to create all these one off dashboards? If we're doing a lot of one off dashboard creation, what haven't we, as the central observability team, done? So there's a lot of work in the beginning to build that enablement and to build that initial governance, but it's also about staying connected, taking time to be one of the people that joins those calls at 3 in the morning, even though they're not solving. If nothing else, understand how observability is benefiting or not and how they can tweak it. So I think there's a big role for them throughout the life cycle, including stepping into sprints and starting to ask about, hey, why aren't you using this in sprint? And here are some ideas. Hey, did you know you can integrate your CI/CD pipeline into observability?
Please put deployment markers on your charts. If you do one thing as
Exactly.
a COT, just hook up the deployment markers. That will get you so far.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Producer, so did I answer your question?
What you said, it's a lot at first, but there are like flags that sort of raise when you realize that like maybe there needs to be additional enablement that you can keep an eye on. And yeah, it's an ongoing process.
I think if I wanted to add anything to close out, I want to share what worked. What type of work lit me up? Like what really is giving you value from your COT? And there are three things. They are the most effective advocates for observability internally. Doesn't matter how good your vendor's docs are, doesn't matter how many little videos they put out. A developer at your org will listen to another developer at your org 1,000 times over than anything a vendor puts out, even if it's high quality, like the stuff we put out. So you on the COT play a very visible role internally. If you just saw a new trace workflow from a vendor and you want to show it off, as a vendor, I'm like, please send the nice, beautiful demo we recorded and show how you used it to solve a problem using your company's data. That is the most effective way to get adoption, is showing how your company's data benefits from some new feature. The second is measurement. These incumbent vendors, these legacy vendors, are really reticent to give you the MAUs and the DAOs and the WOWs and all of that stuff, but it is really critically important that you pull that information out. How many users are looking at traces? Is only 10% of your devs looking at traces and you're paying so much? The problem isn't necessarily the data. You probably need to spend more time enabling, showing, training, demoing. And if you don't have those usage numbers, that's a real problem. So closing that visibility gap is important for this team, as well as collaborative learning experiences together. Sometimes you just want another human to show you the ropes, not here's a monitor I set up, but let me walk you through how I do it and the shortcuts I know. That is how you enable and how you train up an org of devs who are all bought in on observability. Those are the three effective things I've done that I think get you a lot more value than making your COT team the monitoring butlers, so to speak.
I am in love with the monitoring butler idea. Just as in episode 1, we talked about scoping your metrics, I think we also have to think about the time you invest in instrumentation, and it is not universal across your environment. And I go back to, I'm going to date myself more than I normally do, but I'm going to go back to the days when DR was more of a thing, disaster recovery. And it's the idea of, all right, I've got a system here and it's really critical to my business. And so then I need to have an identical system over here unless in case something happens, right? So it's that redundancy. But I get to that and I use this comparison because when you do a DR strategy, you don't treat everything with the same level of investment and time. And so I think we have to call that mentality as we think about what to instrument and how much to instrument. Instrumenting the shopping cart in your workflow or in your customer's journey is far more critical than maybe a preferences toggle in their UI.
The practical reality is you're likely working in an organization that does not have an observability strategy. If you were, you would definitely know what the strategy is. So when you walk into an org, you can't assume that all of the data that's being collected is collected for a good reason. In fact, many orgs, they've added a couple agents that emit every metric, and then they just don't ratchet that down. They don't delete. You already should be working from the premise that you're over collecting. There's a lot of noise in that data. There's a lot of data that's not useful. And like your strategy needs to be around how do I get the most meaningful data? And that's what gets stored. And that's what we pay for. That is the real challenge. I think for any observability strategy, you want to accept here's where we're starting from. This is a good base. Now, where do I go? But in fact, you're on a very shaky foundation.
And to be fair to all of our observability nerd friends out there everywhere, we all fell into the collect everything model many years ago. And now we've got to step back from that and think not only why am I collecting this, but what's the intent?
I always appreciated working in orgs that at least
Yep.
had these high level buckets. And if you do that work as an org from the get go, that's helpful for security teams. That's helpful for so many other teams other than your central observability team, but it really helps them prioritize their time in ways the business wants, like that align with where the business is also making investments.
Paige and I are both very similar. I tend to get very animated when I'm talking about observability. If you run in different social circles like I do, most of my friends are like, I don't know what the hell he's talking about. Do you? And they're like, no, just give him another drink. It'll be fine.
I feel like this was just a huge help for someone who doesn't get to talk or think about OTel every day. Just hearing how important it is in the entire framework of observability as a culture and governance. You take care of your neighborhood, you take care of your dashboards, and all of that jazz. So I'm excited to continue the conversation in this next episode.
All right. So thank you everybody for joining. We look forward to having you on the next podcast. Don't forget to like or subscribe.
This podcast is brought to you by Chronosphere. Chronosphere is the observability platform built for control in the modern containerized world. Recognized as a leader by major analyst firms, Chronosphere empowers customers to focus on the data and insights that matter to reduce data complexity, optimize costs, and remediate issues faster.